Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a bit of a pivot. We're moving away from algorithms and startups to look at something much, much older.
We are. We're exploring the nature of true responsibility.
And our source for this is fascinating. We're looking at excerpts from the Brahma Purana, specifically focusing on the creator, Brahma, but not during creation.
No, we're focusing on the moments after creation was complete. We tend to fetishize the act of creation itself. The big launch, the innovation.
The power.
The power, exactly. But what happens next? What happens when the thing you made starts moving on its own? That's where the real wisdom is.
I think this focus is so important. We've all been there, right? You launch a product, you start a team, even just finish a project. There's that one moment of it's done.
And then, immediately, it becomes about maintenance, about sustaining it. And our mission for this deep dive is to really understand the difference between, say, control and true responsibility.
So let's set the scene. The Purana says that when life began, when movement replaced silence, Brahma was watching. And you'd expect, what?
Pride? You'd expect a moment of divine self-congratulation. Look what I have made.
That's the human instinct, for sure. You step back, you take credit for the achievement.
Yet the source is so clear on this. There was no pride. Instead, the feeling was weight.
Wait.
An immediate, crushing weight. The burden of responsibility. The text frames creation not as a display of power, but as a trust that was placed upon him.
That distinction right there, authority as a trust versus ownership, that's huge.
It is.
Because if you see your job, your company, as something you own, you get defensive. But if it's a trust, your whole focus shifts to stewardship, to long-term health.
It completely changes your orientation. The architect realized the hard part wasn't the building, it was the sustaining. And that's where the pressure really begins, because complexity emerged almost instantly.
Okay, let's unpack that complexity. What was the specific challenge? It wasn't just that the universe was expanding, was it?
No, the problem was internal. As life multiplied, differences emerged. You had beings with, wildly different levels of awareness.
And this created disorder. Was it malice?
Not at first. The source says the critical issue was a lack of consequence awareness. Some beings acted with a kind of internal discipline, understanding their impact,
But most didn't.
but a huge number acted purely on impulse, maximizing their own immediate needs without any thought for the consequences to the larger system.
So it's like you've got intelligence and strength, but no wisdom or restraint.
Precisely. And the Purana is explicit. The combination intelligence without discipline, strength without restraint, is the engine of disorder. It's what leads to the self-destruction of what was built.
That sounds exactly like a scaling crisis in a company. You grow so fast that the original vision is lost, and individual parts start optimizing for themselves at the expense of the whole.
And what's the typical modern response to that chaos?
Control. You tighten the rules, you add more layers of management, you punish every deviation.
It's a defensive reflex. But this is where the source offers this really radical alternative. Brahma chose not to do that. No control, no punishment.
So what did he do instead? What was the alternative path?
His response was guidance over control. He established what the text calls paths of knowledge.
Paths of knowledge, so not a detailed rule book.
Not a rule book, more like a set of guiding principles. Instead of trying to police every single action across the cosmos, he created systems for beings to understand their own nature and their interdependence.
I see. So wisdom was offered as an opportunity, not a command.
Exactly. A command requires obedience, and it stops working the moment you're not looking. An opportunity requires engagement. It cultivates internal discipline, autonomy.
That's a very different leadership stance. If I issue a command, I'm responsible for the outcome. If I offer knowledge, I'm delegating the responsibility for understanding to them.
Right. And that leads to the most challenging part of this whole model, the problem of consequence.
What happened to those who just ignored the opportunity? The ones who kept acting on impulse?
This is where it gets really interesting. He let them learn through consequence.
He just let the disorder happen. That sounds incredibly risky, almost irresponsible. Why not step in and correct the behavior?
Because the source frames it differently. True, deep wisdom, the kind that creates lasting self-restraint, it can't be legislated. It has to be experienced.
So if you're corrected externally every time you make a mistake,
You never develop the internal mechanism for self-correction. The consequence itself becomes the teacher. Allowing something to fail was paradoxically an act of responsibility aimed at the system's long-term health.
that requires an incredible amount of restraint.
It's the core of this whole philosophy. Responsibility here is defined as knowing when to act, but also, and maybe more powerfully, knowing when to step back and allow growth through experience.
And that restraint points to another big realization he had, which was about his own limitations.
A huge one. He recognized that the creation was simply too vast for any single force to oversee everything. That's a level of humility most leaders today would never admit.
That you can't handle it all yourself.
Right. It's the first step to effective governance. Admitting that power has to be distributed to be sustainable. If the whole system depends on one person, it's brittle. It's destined to fail.
So how is this accountability shared? The text mentions specific complementary forces, right?
Exactly. The system wasn't designed to depend on him alone. The source details 3 core forces needed for balance: preservation, transformation, and balance itself.
Okay, let's break those down. Preservation and transformation. They sound like they're in direct conflict.
They are, and that's the point. They're complementary. Preservation is the force for stability. It maintains the structure, the order. It keeps things from just descending back into chaos.
It's the operations team, the ones who keep the lights on.
Yes, but stability by itself leads to stagnation. If nothing ever changes, the system can't adapt. It dies. That's why you need transformation.
And transformation is destruction.
It's the cycle of necessary destruction, change, decay, yes. It's the force that clears out the old, the failed, the obsolete to make room for the new. It keeps the system dynamic.
So preservation holds the line, transformation pushes it forward. And if you have one without the other, the whole thing just grinds to a halt or explodes.
Precisely. And that's where the third force, balance, comes in. It's the oversight. It ensures that preservation doesn't become tyranny and transformation doesn't become just annihilation.
It manages the tension between the two.
It ensures equilibrium is maintained through cooperation, not domination. The key insight is that the system's strength came from this distribution of roles. No single force was allowed to have total control.
That is such a powerful model for organizations. You have the finance department pushing for preservation, for efficiency, and the R&D team pushing for transformation, for radical change.
And without a leadership that values balance and cooperation between them, they just tear the company apart.
Okay, so this ancient source has just given us a masterclass in distributed leadership. What does this all mean for us, for the learner, in our day-to-day lives?
It gives us a very clear lens to look at our own actions. The Purana basically warns us about the counterfeits of true responsibility.
Let's drill down on that. What's the first counterfeit?
The first is when authority is exercised without humility. That, the text says, always degenerates into control.
Meaning, if you think your way is the only way.
You step in too often. You micromanage. You suffocate the very growth you claim you want to foster because you don't trust the other forces at play.
And the second failure. The source mentioned responsibility without wisdom becoming a burden.
Yes, that's what happens when you take on a massive role without the wisdom to delegate, to set boundaries, or to practice that restraint we talked about. The role will crush you.
You become the bottleneck.
You become the bottleneck. You mistake being busy for being effective, and it leads to burnout for you and stagnation for the system.
We see this everywhere. The parent who solves every single problem for their child, the manager who has to approve every tiny decision, they think they're being responsible.
But they're actually demonstrating a failure of both humility and wisdom. They've mistaken ownership for service. And the source reminds us that true greatness lies in carrying responsibility with that humility.
It redefines what success looks like. Success isn't controlling the outcome. It's building a system, a family, a company, whatever, that is resilient and can function even when you're not there.
That is the final, powerful definition here. Responsibility is about being accountable to the whole. Brahma's role was service to creation, not ownership of it.
So the ultimate takeaway from this text: true responsibility is fulfilled through those difficult, often invisible acts of wisdom, humility, and restraint, not through the easy, visible act of control.
It really is an ancient shortcut to reframing modern leadership.
Which brings us to the final thought we want to leave with you.
If Brahma's design for the entire universe included allowing beings to learn through consequence, and he built in mechanisms for balance and transformation that were outside of his direct, constant control.
Where in your own responsibilities, at work, at home, or even in your own personal development, are you currently stepping in too often? Where are you preventing the necessary wisdom that can only come from lived experience and earned consequence?
That's something to think about this week. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.